Antoinette Dale Henderson, and I was recently invited by the CMI, the Chartered Management Institute, to deliver a webinar as part of CMI Women, but also to coincide with the launch of my new book, Power Up, The Smart Woman's Guide to Unleashing Her Potential. And so as part of the webinar, there are a number of different questions that I answered, but there are also a few questions that we didn't get a chance to go through in detail. So rather than sending out a long Q&A document, what I thought I would do is create this video for you, which I hope will give you a bit more insight on top of what you heard at the webinar. At the end of the webinar, at the end of this session, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to offer you a special CMI rate to attend a Gravitas Masterclass, which I'm running online on the 24th of April. And so if you're interested in working with me and finding out more around your leadership communication, your impact and your influence, then I'll be sharing more of that at the end of the session. Okay, so what were the questions? There was one question that came up a number of different times, which was a question around how a woman can make sure she has her voice heard even if she's in a male-dominated environment. And that question actually came up 3 different times. And so my response to that is, first of all, look at how you can remove the whole gender thing from your thinking. So rather than thinking, I'm a woman in a male-dominated environment, think about your expertise and the value that you bring and start from there. And so get crystal clear on the skills that you have, the qualifications, the projects that you've worked on, the results that you've delivered, the impact that they've had. Get super clear on what makes you brilliant at what you do, and then get really great at articulating that as well. The clearer you are on the value that you bring, the more confidence that you'll have, and the more able you will be to share your voice in those environments, and the less that you'll start thinking about gender, the less that will be an issue for you. Another thing for you to think about is not only the confidence and your expertise that you have, but also how you communicate. Now, I'm not saying that this is always the case, but what can often happen with women, if they feel under pressure or stressed, or maybe do feel self-conscious that there are mainly men in an environment, is that then tends to show up in her non-verbal communication. And so it can show up in her voice. If a woman is under pressure, listen to what happens to my voice when I feel under pressure. My breath starts coming out more from my throat area, and I can start getting quite laboured with my breathing, and it can start going quite squeaky, and the resonance starts to disappear when we start going into that sort of stress mode. And so it's really important, if you're feeling under pressure and you're feeling tense, and maybe you're feeling self-conscious because you're one of the few women in the environment, is to breathe deeply. Because what that will then do is mean that when you communicate, you do it from a place of greater resonance. So you're communicating more from the lower part of your lungs, and you're doing more diaphragmatic breathing. And so your voice is going to come across in a more measured, clear and strong way than if you're under pressure and it's all coming from up here. So think about your voice first. Think about what you're communicating. Be prepared in advance about what you're going to say, and that will mean that when you speak, you will have a voice that people will want to listen to more. The other thing to think about is your body language and your gestures and your posture. Now, this is just as much the case whether you're communicating virtually or whether you're communicating when you're in the same room as people. If we're feeling unconfident or self-conscious, or we're feeling like, it's obvious that we're one of the few women in the room, and that gender thing is starting to take over, then that can quite easily show up in our body language. And so we might start to get quite defensive, we might fold ourselves in, we might make ourselves quite small, we might start putting our hand over our mouth and maybe fiddling around with our earring or maybe our ears. Can you see how that body language, all of that is going to make you seem quite small and therefore minimize your impact, whether it's through a 2-dimensional screen or whether it's in the real world. And so therefore, if you're wanting to have greater impact as a woman and make sure you have your voice heard, you have to do the opposite of that. So it's about taking up your space. It's about coming closer to the screen. It's about making sure that your gestures are positive and strong, and that you're there, that you have the impact. And so sit with your bottom at the back of the chair, have your feet planted on the ground, open up your posture, and that will then positively affect how you come across as well. And so those are all techniques and things that you can bear in mind if you want to counter any concerns around being the only woman in your environment or being in a male-dominated environment. Another question that came up just looking at the list here is around how to get past the imposter syndrome. Now, often people talk about imposter syndrome as though it's a bad thing, and I like to flip that on its head and actually think about it, that the imposter syndrome will raise its head. It will show up in those situations where you're feeling like you're outside of your comfort zone. And usually when we're outside of our comfort zone, we're trying something new, we're pushing beyond our natural boundaries, we're taking risks, and we're learning loads. And so the imposter syndrome is actually a really good sign that you're progressing. Only a good sign though if you don't let it overtake you. And so if those feelings of feeling like you're the outsider, like someone's going to come and tap you on the shoulder and tell you that you don't belong, or when the imposter syndrome starts affecting us in a negative way, it's then about using all the tools and techniques around knowing your value and communicating from a place of strength that I was talking about earlier. That's when those are going to really come to the fore. Okay, so if you have feelings of imposter syndrome, generally that's an indication that actually you're progressing and you're developing and you're doing really, really well. But if the imposter syndrome is starting to get in the way of your progression and your confidence, remember all the things I was saying before about knowing your expertise, communicating your worth, and using your impact in a positive, strong way. So what else have we got? Any tips for getting over shyness? I think I mentioned this on the webinar itself, that often there's a saying which is the squeaky wheel gets the oil, and so the perception can be that only people who are extrovert and loud and confident and out there, they're the only ones who are going to succeed. Whereas actually, if you think about the spectrum, introverted to extroverted, often people who are closer to on the introversion side, often they're the ones who listen more, they reflect more, they therefore have more meaningful things to say because they've thought about it, than people who shoot more from the hip and are louder and more extroverted. And so rather than using the term shy, I would change that term to something that reflects more your ability to reflect, to listen, to take in information, and to speak in a measured way. Frame it in that way instead. But don't let the shyness or the introversion stop you from actually speaking out. And so a couple of techniques there are, firstly, make sure that you get your voice heard early on in a meeting, or whether it's a conference call and you're in a meeting online, make sure that you have a contribution and that you make it early on in the meeting so that people know that you're there and that they will turn to you. And then secondly, practice some of the techniques around communication, sharing your opinion, giving something of yourself. Practice some of those techniques in a safe environment. So whether it's with friends or family, practice communicating. Because the thing is that if you let shyness, in inverted commas, if you let that overcome you and you let it stop you from speaking, that it's not only you who will suffer as a result, it's also the people around you will miss out on the brilliant things that you've got to say. So use that as an impetus, use that as driver to encourage you to move beyond any feelings of shyness that you have. Okay, what else do we have? Who inspired me in my early career and how did they inspire me? I had a manager called Noreen when I was about 25, so fairly early on in my career, and she gave me my first personal development book. She gave me The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, which was a brilliant book then, still is a brilliant book now. And she really listened to me. You know, she wasn't out there extrovert too, like loud. She really listened to me. She really championed me, and she gave me that inner confidence because she believed in my ability to succeed. So I would encourage you to seek out managers who can give that to you. But also, if you are a manager, make sure you give that to other people as well. All right, what else? Women's greatest superpower today. Well, I think it's a combination of the 6 different powers that are in my book, which are intuition, knowledge, resilience, magnetism, relationships, and assertiveness. I think all those 6 things combined are superpowers. But I think the one that overrides all of it is the power of focus. The clearer you are on who you are, where you want to go, and the difference that you're going to make, the clearer you are on your purpose, the more effective and the more brilliant you're going to be. So get clear on your purpose. All right, any other questions? How can I know if I'm being assertive or arrogant and aggressive? All right, so I talked in the webinar about a continuum where you've got passivity on one end, and then you've got aggression on the other end, with assertiveness in the middle and passive aggression somewhere in between. And so, you know, the 2 ends of the extremes, whether we go into passive, where we shut down, that's the equivalent of flight, or aggression at the other end, which is where we go into fight. Both of those extremes are triggered when we go into a fight or flight mode. So we're not at our best when we are when we've lost our power and we've gone to either end of the extreme. So how can you tell? So the question was, how can I tell and know if I'm being assertive rather than too arrogant or aggressive? So that's a tricky one, because sometimes the perception people that have around when a woman is being assertive, sometimes the perception that people have is that she's not being assertive, but that she's being over strong and she's being over dominant and she's being bullying perhaps, or even arrogant and forceful. And that could be a perception that some people have because they're just not used to strong, powerful women. And so don't allow that to stop you from being powerful and strong. I think the key difference is that if we're using our power to overpower people, if we're using it to squash people, or if some way dominate them or manipulate them or push them down, so if it's power over, then that's when aggression and arrogance comes in. Whereas if you see that the pushing down, that's power over. Whereas what truly powerful people do is power with, and so it's at the same level. And so think about when you're communicating people in that strong way, are you still viewing them at the same level as you? Are you still seeing them as an equal? Because if that's the case, that will temper any overpowerful communication styles that you might have, which would then overpower them. So start by seeing them as an equal, and then that will then lead you to communicate with them in an equal way. So be careful with your body language again and your voice. If you become quite dominant, if you start shouting, or if you start leaning into them like this, or if your eyes start going bigger, or if you start like your jaw starts tensing, and you know, those are all physical signs that you have tipped over into aggression. And arrogance, so arrogance will come when the ego is having too much of a play, and arrogance will come when it's all about the big I am, how amazing you are, and by definition then pushing everyone below you, underneath you. And so assertiveness is very much an equal place, equal communication, equal viewpoints, and equal exchange of views. I think those are the key ones. Those are the main questions that came out. I hope you found them useful. I promised at the beginning of today that I would be sharing an offer with you. So in addition to the book Power Up, most of what I do is I run a Gravitas Masterclass, and that's all about how managers and leaders can communicate as effectively as possible and fulfill their potential in the workplace. So there's a lot around impact and influence in that space. And so right now I'm running one which is an online version of the live masterclass, and the next one is on the 24th of April. And you can find details of that Gravitas Masterclass online on Eventbrite. And what I'd like to offer all CMI members and anyone who took part in the original CMI webinar or has listened to this Q&A, I'd like to offer you all a 20% discount on the rates that are quoted on the Eventbrite page. So take a look, and if you're interested, then please do email me, Antoinette, ANTOINETTE, at Gravitas Program, which is GRAVITAS Program, which is PROGRAMME.com, and that's Antoinette at gravitasprogram.com. I hope you found this Q&A useful, and please do get in touch if you have other questions.